Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with this week's episode of the Market Monday. So let's talk Pro Tour Aether Revolt. Pro Tour Aether Revolt. What a crazy, crazy, crazy tournament with one of the best win percentages ever by an archetype, and then one of the worst win percentages by the most popular archetype, which is Jeskai Saheeli, that has ever been at a Pro Tour. Now, if you haven't gone over to MTG Goldfish and read Seth's article about Pro Tour Aether Revolts by the numbers, I highly suggest that you do. It's a very well written article. We'll skim over it from time to time in this Market Monday video, and it's very, very pertinent to where I think that the market is going to go and what cards we can basically see are going to be going up and what cards I think are traps to get into at this moment. So first of all, let's just talk about the Pro Tour Aether Revolt. So the big news was the largest percentage of the metagame was made up with different Jeskai Saheeli decks, or different Saheeli combo decks. The one that did the best overall was the 4-color Aetherworks Marvel Saheeli combo, because it had different ways of winning, and the deck that runs like the Rogue Refiner and the Whirler Rogues are pretty good against clogging the board against the Mardu, as well as against the green-black Snake decks. And so I think that moving forward, that is the best way to, if you're going to run the combo, it's going to be the best way to deal with a deck like this that has a lot of diverse threats with the Mardu Vehicles. So I guess the breakout card, why these decks did so well against the Jeskai Saheeli decks, is Unlicensed Disintegration could kill both the Felidar Guardian as well as kill the Saheeli, basically 2-for-1ing the combo, and it was also extremely good with like a turn 1 Toolcraft Exemplar into a turn 2 Heart of Kron into like a turn 3 Veteran Motorist, that you could just push through so much aggro. So this is a deck that gets better and better as the board progresses, so it keeps kind of up with the mid-range and even the control decks, because every one of their threats has to be answered, and then has the best answers to the combo with the Shock and Unlicensed Disintegration. So I am under the assumption that Mardu Vehicles was a metagame call. It is actually not done too well. If you look over here in the, let's go over to the metagame for Standard, you can see that Mardu Vehicles every now and again, this is recently, so this is the same time the Pro Tour is going on. We have one Mardu Vehicles at a 5-0 finish. We have 2 here. We have none in this bracket. We have the Pro Tour, which was every deck was Mardu Vehicles in the top 8. And right before the Pro Tour, again, 1, 2, 3, so 3 here. So it definitely is one of the staples in the metagame. And it was, this is nothing new. Back during the U-White Flash and Aetherworks Marvel, there still was Mardu Vehicles. It was still a good deck. It was still a tier 1 deck. And it was the breakout deck when the Kaladesh came out, and people were saying that Mardu Vehicles could not be stopped, and then we saw the exact opposite happen at the Pro Tour, when people metagamed against the Vehicles, and Vehicles last time around got slammed at the Pro Tour, because people were playing cards like now I can't think of the card, the Weaver of Lightning. Weaver of Lightning was kind of the breakout card at that particular, because it was so good at just taking out all the very vulnerable 1 toughness creatures from the Vehicles deck list. If you look at a lot of these, like the Motorists, the Penal Orthopter token, the this one actually isn't using Toolcraft, right? Wow. So okay, so this one didn't win though. Yes, it's using Toolcraft. Toolcraft Exemplar and Veteran Motorist. Those are the 2 best threats, just get destroyed by the Weaver. And then also things like Shocks end up doing 3 damage with Weavers, and can end up taking out other things that have 3 toughness and whatnot. So I think that moving forward, we might see the blue-red decks start putting in Weavers as kind of the trump card against the vehicle decks, and I don't expect Vehicles to be this big boogeyman. In fact, if we look at the metagame, back over to the metagame, I would say week 1 was all about, see if we can go down to week 1 and see one of these tournaments here, was all about the black-green Snake deck. It won a lot of first place finishes You can look at the black green Delirium, black green Strakes, black green Snakes, black green Strakes, and then the Jeskai Copycat or the Jeskai Saheeli decks came in to kind of weed out these black green decks because Fumigate was really good against the black green Constrictor decks or Snake decks, and a lot of times they couldn't disrupt the combo. They had to spend too much of their resources going into like Grasp of Darkness, which they didn't want to. They want to be progressing their board each time. And the Jeskai Copycat was pretty good against the black green Snake deck. And then, as we saw, of course, the Pro Tour, people were expecting the Jeskai Copycat because it just did had a phenomenal finish of the Star City Open. Let's see if we can find that particular one. Yeah, look at this, the Star City Open Richmond. It was right before the Pro Tour. Jeskai Copycat, black green Delirium. So Copycat, all of these. There was one, I don't know if it was a Star City Open. I think it was. That had all of the top 8. Every top 8 deck was a Saheeli combo deck. So anyway, I'm still under the impression that this was just a Pro Tour metagame call. People expected the Copycat deck to be the #1 deck there, at least by numbers, which it was, so they were not wrong. And they chose the deck that was best at beating the #1 deck, and it was also good against the #2 deck, especially how some of the decks started to try to have a good matchup versus the Jeskai deck. They left themselves very vulnerable to the Mardu deck. Some of these Constrictor decks weren't running a lot of fatal pushes, for example, as they're trying to go more Grasp of Darkness only. And if they're not really responding to the 1-drop, then the 2-drop, then the 3-drop, what the Mardu deck is doing is better than the black-green Constrictor deck. So Mardu Vehicles is by far not a boogeyman that cannot be beat. I think that we're going to actually see some Ishchana Delirium decks come back. That was the deck, the black-green Delirium, the last time around, was kind of the nail in the coffin of the vehicle decks because the Ishchana was just impossible to deal with, and they had Liliana is also a very good card against Mardu Vehicles as it takes out the Toolcraft Exemplars and Veteran Motorists and also can stick around. Now it does get a little bit better because the Heart of Quran is better at one-shotting Liliana than the Looter Scooter was, but at the same time, Looter Scooter added a lot of like inevitability late game. It just was so good at fixing the opponent or your hand to really capitalize on what your opponent's doing, set up what you're trying to do, and close out the game. I really am not under the impression that Heart of Quran is nearly as good as the Smuggler's Copter. It's still, the Smuggler's Copter did die to like Harness Lightning a lot easier, or even cards like the Fiery Temper, whereas the Heart of Quran does dodge it, but the Heart of Quran is legendary, you can't have 2 out. I remember one of the toughest draws versus Mardu Vehicles was the double Smuggler's Copter draw, whereas Mardu Vehicles, because of the legendary rules, the Heart of Quran cannot do that. Yes, Heart of Quran might be a little bit better with like cards like Gideon, but I think that it's still something that dies to Grasp of Darkness. It's still something that can die to Fatal Push. And when those black-green Delirium decks come out to weed out the Mardu Vehicles, then we're going to see this kind of cat-mouse game with the big 3, what I'd say, is the black-green decks, the Saheeli decks, and the Mardu decks. They're going to continue to be this rock, paper, scissors formats. I think that having like green-white tokens in this mix is also good because green-white tokens is very good against, it has a lot of game versus Mardu Vehicles. It's also insanely good versus the black-green Snake deck. Where it does suffer is it's usually pretty bad against Copycat. Like green white tokens, that's a pretty lopsided matchup. It's very hard for them to close out the game before they get comboed off, or some of these other blue control decks the green white tokens can struggle against. We also have these energy decks that are going to come from time again, and black red aggro I'd put in the same category as Mardu Vehicles because they have a lot of overlap using a lot of the same cards. So yeah, so I guess that's where we come into Market Monday is I don't think investing in Mardu Vehicles might be the smartest play. These are still going to be cards that are open quite a bit because we are still at the height of the draft season for the Aether Revolt. So Heart of Quran, for example, if we go over to the cards that actually did increase, this was actually kind of a boring Pro Tour for card increases. As you can see, just a day after, the only cards that have really gone up in value is the Heart of Kron and the Scrapheap Scrounger. Scrapheap Scrounger is another card that is interesting because is it time for people to start putting back in the Flaying Tendrils to deal with Scrapheap Scrounger. Flaying Tendrils can get rid of the Motorists, it can get rid of the Toolcraft Exemplars, it can kill the Scrapheap Scrounger. If the Scrapheap was the artifact that was out, it will kill the Inventor's Apprentice. They all get exiled. That's one of the good game plans for the Scrapheap Scrounger is it does give the kind of reach, the range for late game with the Scrap Heap coming back. So it's $4.70. This card was low. It's very, very tough, though, for a rare to go above the $5 mark. And same thing with a mythic above the $20 mark. Unless it's being played in virtually every deck, then it's going to go above that $25 mark. Whereas Heart of Kron, I think it does go in enough decks to justify a $20 price tag. The Legendary makes it a lot more awkward, so they want to, is it going to be a 4 of going forward in all of these decks, or are they going to go more over the Cultivator's Caravan strategy? I've seen even some other vehicles be put, like the Aether, the Miner card, or the 3/5 Lifelink card. So I don't know. There's just a lot of speculation of how the metagame is going to adjust. So speaking of which, I think that the whole talk about banning, it's a little bit disappointing that the copycat decks did not do very well, because I think that now that the talk of banning the Felidar Guardian is out of the question, I think that if they do ban it, it might just only be because they are sticklers on bad design, which I think Wizards should be. Sticklers on bad design. I think if there's a card that is not working as intended, as they've admitted in their article, they did not see. They just spaced it with the. I think it was Sam Stoddard wrote an article about cards. Interactions, how they actually end up playing out versus how they tested them, and spent some time on Felidar Guardian saying that, yeah, we really should have said artifact or creature, whereas just bouncing Saheeli over and over, we did not intend for that to happen in Standard. So I think that it is a bad thing for Standard having a turn 4 infinite combo. You can turn 4 it with the Servant of the Conduit. It's happened to me so many times in the more Saheeli 4-color energy strategy, as well as just the inevitable 5-color or just the inevitable hold up negate on like turn 7 or turn 8, I think is when you can get off the negate Saheeli Felidar Guardian combo. So anyway, I think that going back to a standard that this is most like, I would say would be Caw-Blade and Valakut. So I used to say even clear back then that Caw-Blade was a problem, and I would not say that Mardu Vehicles is nearly as good as Caw-Blade, but the whole reason that Caw-Blade was so good is that people that were on Valakut refused to give the deck up. Let me repeat that. If any of you played during that time, that was one of the most lopsided matchups it was just as lopsided as the Saheeli versus Mardu Vehicles. Caw-Blade just stomped Valakut, just absolutely stomped it. It was very, very tough for Valakut decks because they did need to resolve a Primeval Titan, and because the Caw-Blade decks could switch the gear very, very quickly and then take over the game with being hooked up to a sword. Or just even slamming a Gideon down, and the old school Gideon was very good at keeping you alive, and it really could just switch gears. And the blue decks, it was a blue tempo deck, so tempo decks do very good against combo because they establish a threat early, and then they counter everything that comes out afterwards. So Valakut had struggled. It really, really struggled to be able to get the combo if their Explorers, if their Kalani Hard Expeditions, if their Titans were all countered. It dirtled for a long time, and they had to try to rely on just like dropping land go, and it just wasn't a good strategy. Well, the whole thing is there was decks that, like Vampires and Boros, that was not too terrible versus Caw-Blade. They could actually push through before Caw-Blade could get established. The Jace Fate Seal Lock was not nearly as good against those type of hyper-aggressive decks as it was versus the other decks in the format, and it was just impossible for those decks, though, to race Valakut. Valakut was very, very good at getting off a fast kind of combo win and just killing the vampires. And they had some cards like Slagstorm back in the day that was very, very good against punishing the go-wide strategies, whether it be the Boros Landfall or the Kadatha Red decks or the vampire decks. And that was the real problem, was not Caw-Blade, it was Valakut. So I'm kind of anticipating the same type of format if they don't ban the Saheeli combo. The decks that are very, very good at beating Mardu cannot beat the combo. So if people are just going, there are certain players, just like control players, there are certain players that absolutely love degenerate combos, and they're going to play them regardless if they're good. They're going to look at that 34% win percentage from the Pro Tour and be like, meh, whatever, I'm still going to play it because I like playing it. And it's just going to, if that's going to be the attitude moving forward, we are going to have a very, 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 very bad rock, paper, scissors standard where you can only play 3 decks and that's it, or maybe 4 decks. Maybe you put the torrential Gearhulk decks in that mix. So I'm hoping that Felidar Guardian gets banned for that very reason, and that's why I think that like investing in Saheeli is still very risky. And the same thing with even investing in Heart of Khorans or investing in the Vehicles deck is also incredibly risky, because if the Felidar Guardian goes away, the vehicle decks, in my opinion, will go away as well, because that is their number one win percentage deck, is the Jeskai decks. All right, so let's talk about some hidden gems from the Pro Tour. So let's go over here and look at the 27 decks. These are the decks that did the best as far as in the constructed. And why I like the Pro Tour is, even if you, like, say this person did terrible at draft, if you're still playing in the Pro Tour, you're still playing as very, very competent players and competent decks. So even if you start out 0-3, but then end up going 5-3 in the constructed, or 5-0 in the constructed portion, you're playing against good people that entire day. And so all the decks that did go the highest were 2 Mardu Vehicle decks we've talked about, the Green-Black Constrictor deck that did have this Lifecrafter's Bestiary, and the Aether Sphere Harvester, which are kind of a cool little... also the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. So this is more of an energy strategy to the black-green deck. We've seen other decks go more of the, let's just try to get out the Gearhulk as quickly as possible. Let's put in other beater-based cards, the early beater-based cards, and have a little more game in the, as far as running cards like Fatal Push in the sideboard. This one just went all out energy, so that you have, every one of these has to be answered. These are all threats. This deck is a nightmare for control to deal with, because every one of these cards is going to take over the game if you let it stay out for like even a turn. Long Cuss Cub gets energy every time it attacks in and does damage. It's going to get energy and get bigger. The Bristling Hydra is just a pain with the hexproof. The Winding Constrictor just goes insane with any of these cards, as it just makes all the counters double, or well, not quite double, but you get an additional counter every time you use it. And Attune starts you off with a nice energy start, so like the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner can start drawing cards immediately on the following turn, so it feels like a Dark Confidant in this type of deck. So anywho, I really like this deck. I think that this does have a lot of merit into investing. The cards that I think that are still pretty good to invest in would be, the Bristling Hydra I think is in a pre-constructed deck, so it's really, really iffy. But the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner I think was the big take here. I think that the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner is quite undervalued at this moment, and it's Glint, how do I spell this stupid thing? We have the Glint-Sleeve. Why is it saying leaf? Let's go over to the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. Yeah, $2. This seems very, very underrated for a card that has such a huge upside of drawing cards. If we do end up with this like tempo-based strategy where card advantage really, really matters, this is definitely a great card to get into. So I do like this one as a particular spec card, because it's undervalued at the moment. Yes, it is going to be drafted for a bit longer, so keep that in mind. I kind of don't like investing in either Kaladesh or Aether Revolt cards at the moment, because they are going to continue to be opened as 2-ofs and 1-ofs in every draft that is being drafted from here until Amonkhet comes out. I believe there are a bunch of sealed Grand Prix and sealed other events that are going to be happening within that time period, which just means there's going to be more supply into the mix. But if you can pick up these cards like on TC Player here for like $1, if you even have undervalued ones under this, I think this is a pretty good card to look at for an investment standpoint. It's one of the better wannabe Dark Confidants we've had in the past. So I mean, they've tried like Painseer. What was the one they did the last time around? It was hard to get it to work. I can't even think of it at the moment. But this one is probably the best one, just because energy is easy to set up. So over to these other 27 decks. We have still a lot more of the Mardu Vehicles. Here's another energy-based strategy of the black green. I think this is the way going forward with the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. And that was so basically just the black green and the Mardu Vehicles was the way to go for the 27 point decks. Now onto the 24 to 26, it gets a little bit more diverse here. Lots of Mardu Vehicles, Mardu Vehicles. There is a copycat control that did well. Then Mardu Vehicles, Mardu Vehicles. Sultai Delirium Control. This is absolutely one I wanted to talk about because this is exactly what I'm talking about with the Delirium coming back to punish the Mardu Vehicles. I would be interested to see the matchups that this particular player played against if it was Mardu Vehicles that it was punishing, because it does seem to be very well matched up with the two Lilianas. The Torrential Gearhooks and Noxious Gearhooks give it the late game punch, but just the amount of removal in the sideboard, fatal pushes, grapple or Grasp of Darkness to the slaughter, disallows. This one actually seems like it was halfsies. It was really trying to play against both Mardu Vehicles and against the copycat control or the copycat combo deck, as it does have quite a bit of this main board removal as well as the main board negate disallow, and the negate ends up not being too terrible versus the Mardu vehicle decks because it can on time negate the Heart of Kron. It can also on time negate like the unlicensed disintegration to keep like a tireless tracker alive, I guess. I don't think you'd really want to be negating that, but I mean it does have a lot of game versus the field, which I think is a smart play here. If you're just looking for a deck that overall has game versus everything and no real holes in its game plan, I really like this Sultai, and I think it's not too hard to go into blue to get the combo with the Glimmer of Genius and the Torrential Gearhulk. Speaking of Torrential Gearhulk, this is another card I still think is above like the $23, $24 mark. If this does dip like below 15 again, this card is the most swingy card ever. I think Torrential Gearhulk would be a nice little target to pick up. It's starting to see play clear back, and even in Modern it's seen some play, but in Standard this is one of those cards that could just run away and be the boogeyman card in the right shell. Like if more instances that are really broken get printed, then this card will be the go-to card. Another card that I think is a little bit undervalued at the time would even be the Thing in the Ice decks. Talk about the Weaver and the Thing in the Ice decks. Those have lots of game versus the Mardu Vehicles. Radiant Flames is another card that does very well against those particular strategies. All right, so more Mardu Vehicles. Green-White Tokens did very well. This is one of those decks that I do think does well against Mardu Vehicles, as it clogs up the board exceptionally well. Walking Ballista is very good against Mardu Vehicles. It also puts out that Toolcraft Exemplar. So you're basically doing that. Your turn 1 and turn 2 can be as strong as Mardu Vehicles. You're trading the removal shock and unlicensed disintegration for cards like Stasis Snare. It still has a Heart of Kron, which actually gets a little bit better with the Nissa being able to activate Heart of Kron through Nissa on time on turn 3, and then you can actually double do that. If you just put a plant token, swing in, Nissa's still at 3 with Heart of Kron, you can still accrue it on your turn to have a 4/4 blocker. So Heart of Kron works very well in this particular shell. Late game, this deck is going to mid-range. I think there isn't a better deck than this because it has access to cards like Archangel Avacyn and Gideon. Gideon still is one of the hardest cards for aggro and control to deal with. Turn 4 Gideon, it can be messy to put out the 2/2 Knight and then can just start switching gears and beating down. What's really cool about Gideon is activating Gideon and then also removing the loyalty that you just gained to accrue the Heart of Kron and swing in for 9 damage, and also having a way to protect Gideon on the backswing. So I think that this deck is going to stick around as well. I don't really think there's many cards that are undervalued. Keep an eye on Archangel Avacyn. If it continues to go down even more, this could be a card that you could pick as a card that could go up. Another black-green Delirium. This one goes back nope, this is more of a mid-range route with the Mind Rack Demon. We've seen that a lot of people are preferring Mind Rack Demon and Grim Flayer as the kind of targets for Rishkar and the Verdurous Gearhulk. This one is going a little bit less on both of these. A lot of times they were 2-0s of each of these Delirium decks. And the Boogeyman, did people forget about Kalatos? Kalatos is still super strong versus the Mardu Vehicles. Other things, so Mardu Vehicles, Black-Green Constructor. This one was not using the... Yes, it is, the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. So if you can take away anything from this market money, this would be my pickup. I think that this has definitely proven itself worthy. And not a lot of people talking about this, not a lot of hype around this card. I think this is definitely the card that you should keep an eye on, if not buy your playsets now. Just how many decks is this now in the 24 or better that ran 4 ofs or 3 ofs of the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner? More Mardu Vehicles. We have another Black-Green Constrictor without the Siphoner. This one is going for Catacomb Sifter and Nissa. And this is not the energy strategy. So cards like Sylvan Advocate. A lot of different ways you can build this type of shell with the Winding Constrictor. Another Mardu Vehicles. Black-Red Aggro, which I kind of put in the same category. This is trying to be very hyper-aggressive off of cards like Beaumont Courier. Forerunner of Slaughter. This is cool because Forerunner of Slaughter can give your vehicles haste. So the Heart of Kron can get haste off the Forerunner of Slaughter, but they're only running 1 vehicle in this deck. You can give your Scrap Heap Scroungers haste as well, which it is also a 3/2 for 2 mana. Yeah, not a bad card. It can give itself haste as well. So this is trying to have a more consistent way of getting Unlicensed Disintegration, running Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and has also access to even more burn with Incendiary Flow. I know that some zombie decks also did well. Maybe they didn't do as well as I thought they did. Maybe they just drafted extremely good. And here's the Well-Fast Engineer one. And so this one is trying to go more of the Forerunner of Slaughter. This one's going Well-Fast Engineer to give the Scrap Heap Scroungers +2/+0, for example. Oh, this one runs Forerunner as well. Yeah, that's a pretty cool breakout card. I'm going to try this deck out. This seems like a very, very aggressive, fast deck. Another nice little metagame call versus the Jeskai decks. And more Mardu Vehicles. So anyway... Again, I highly suggest you come over here and read the article by Seth over at MTG Goldfish. Really talks about conversion rates, and if there is some sort of card that stands out to you, please be sure to talk about it in the comment section below. I think that if I were to invest in one card, it would be the Glint-Sleeve Siphoner. I think this is 100% proven itself to be a staple in this sort of strategy. It is Dark Confidant in a deck that leads off with Aether Hubs. So keep that in mind. We all know how powerful that card can be. In fact, it's less of a drawback, I would say, because it does only lose you 1 life. You can't hit a Verder's Gearhulk off it and lose 5 life, for example. So, hey, look, this one, Brad Nilsson used Gonti as well. That's cool. It's actually a pretty sweet tech versus vehicles because everything you hit off their vehicles is going to be something you're going to want to cast in this particular deck. But anyway, moving forward, let me know your predictions of how the metagame is going to adjust. There are probably some other archetypes out there that did exist. I've been trying a Seasons Past control deck. I've been trying various Aetherworks Marvel decks. They're also pretty decent, especially if you go into like Aetherworks Marvel just trying to get a lot of energy value off of like the Rogue Refiner and the Whirler Rogue as well, and then using cards like the Elder Deep Fiend. Speaking of Elder Deep Fiend, we still have so here's a good example right here. So the Rogue Refiner, a Whirler Virtuoso, not Whirler Rogue. Whirler Rogue was way back in the Origins. So this deck just gets so much value off of the Aetherworks Marvel. This one I'm actually not even using the Aetherworks Marvel. No, okay. There was one that did splash in 2 Aetherworks Marvel, I think, and it just gave it a lot more range late game. And then, I mean, you get so much energy with this deck, and then you can just keep activating the Aetherworks Marvel. But the Elder Deep Fiend was a really cool addition into a list like this because it has very good synergy off of cards like the Rogue Refiner. You can sacrifice it to cast the Elder Deep Fiend, tap things down, and then just take over the game. So... in this particular deck, Felidar Guardian has so many flicker targets that are really, really good to flicker. And the deck that was using the Aetherworks Marvel, there was, I believe I did watch an instance where they Felidar Guardian, the Aetherworks Marvel, to do another activation because they had that much energy. So I like Elder Deep Fiend. Just the old T-Merge deck I think is pretty well positioned. It doesn't have the Emrakul to finish off the game, but I still think there's enough finishers. Just Ishkanah itself can be a finisher. and Elder Deep Fiends can be a finisher. I'm going to go back into the Sultai Emerge strategy with Prize Amalgam to see how well that like matches up against both the black-green Snakes deck as well as the Mardu Vehicles. I think those are the two decks you need to focus on beating, and if you can consistently get a deck that is good versus those two decks, I think that can do very well. Speaking of decks that typically do well, I ran a green-black tokens deck back in the day, and I've been testing that, and those are my best two matchups. The matchups that I still struggle against are the blue-red decks like this one right here with the Torrential Gearhulk, as well as the Saheeli combo decks. Both of those can be very, very tough for the black green tokens deck to deal with. So anyway, I've rambled for long enough about the whole market aspect of the Pro 2 Aether Revolt. Again, I do not think that investing in Kaladesh or Aether Revolt cards is smart at this point. You want to wait till after the height of their draft season, and then right when Amonkhet comes out, that's when we want to start like looking at cards to pick up from Kaladesh. I usually like to do it 2 weeks before Amonkhet comes out to really spec on Kaladesh cards. Other than that, I think that we still do have a little bit of time for cards that will be rotating, but if you're going to be investing in any cards from either the Shadows of Innistrad block or the Battle for Zendikar block, you need to sell them about, I would say, 2 weeks before, or maybe even right after the Pro Tour. I would say right after the release of Hour of Devastation, because that's when and each year it's kind of different because you see different vendors trying to get out of cards earlier and earlier. So what I mean by that is they know that cards are going to be rotating, so regardless if the card is doing well or not, that's when they just start selling them off. So keep that in mind. If you're going to be investing in any of the cards from Shadows of Innistrad or Battle for Zendikar, between Battle for Zendikar and Eldritch Moon, you need to really think about getting rid of them as soon as possible after they hit their high points. Anyway, this has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.